If you want me to make a short documentary about Beck, please write yes in the comment section, okay? And I'll see.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you look up Beck on Wikipedia, no, I'm not talking about the manga, you'll find out that he was a musician that was born in the 1970s. He became famous during the 90s and has been a big influencer in making eclectic music more popular. Beck was a big player when it came to anti-folk, art pop, alternative rock, and alternative hip-hop. But how did Beck get universal acclaim with his seemingly obscure music? In this video, we're going to take a closer look at Beck's history and his discography to understand exactly what made his music so accessible and so successful. Beck was born in Los Angeles and grew up listening to hip-hop and folk during his teens. He early on started to perform locally at clubs and coffee houses, and in 1989 he moved to New York and eventually became a part of the anti-folk movement, which sounded a bit like this.
Looking for some good things to make me feel alright.
But it wasn't until 1994 that he eventually broke out with his single Loser, which, by the way, is a really weird song. It's amazing. It's really good and catchy, don't get me wrong, but it mixes together hip-hop, grunge, and rock, so many different genres at the same time. And ever since that single, he was known as one of the most idiosyncratic and creative musicians of the 90s. His first official big album release was called Mellow Gold. He had previously released a few albums before this as well, but Mellow Gold was his first official one. As you'll hear on some of the tracks here, he was a bit inspired by grunge. Pay No Mind is a great example of that. You can hear it on how they picked the guitar chords, the mellow drumming, his singing, the sentimental mood of the whole song. Almost sounds like a Nirvana song. But then again, you also have other songs like Beer Can and Loser that are great examples of how Beck was able to create his very own genre by blending together random instrumentation, hip-hop, alternative song structures, these very obscure lyrics. It was all blended together into the soup of very authentic songs. I've listened to Mellow Gold a couple of times before. I thought it was good, that is a new word, by the way. It was good, but it wasn't amazing, it wasn't outstanding. I would have listened to it again if I had the chance, but it's not on YouTube, it's not on Spotify, so yeah, what can I do? I guess I'll just go out and buy the album sometime.
Yeah.
Got murder on camera. I think what made Loser and Mellow Gold in general so huge was the fact that it was so different. It was fresh, it was relatable, it related to grunge, to hip-hop, to rock, alternative rock, all these different genres, and at the same time it was fresh. You know, Beck is a genre bender, and there's not a lot of those people out there that really make it out there. In 1996, Odelay was released. This was Beck's breakout album. He gained high positions on both the UK and the US charts when it came to sales. And personally, I think this album is a dime piece when it comes to encapsulating just the best of alternative rock and hip-hop during the 90s. On this album, Beck had collaborated with the Dust Brothers, who famously provided some samples on the Beastie Boys' Pulse Boutique album, which, yeah, it's another classic album. The same savant absurdist type of style and lyricism is present here, just in the same way as you would find it on Mellow Gold. The lyrics really doesn't make sense, but it doesn't matter because his absurd way of doing it just really fits together with the soundscape. I would say that the main difference between Mellow Gold and Odelay is that on Odelay, it all sounds, the lyricism and all the sounds in general sound a bit more lush, a bit more ambitious and well-defined in a way. Now this question always comes up. Why is Beck's music so weird? Why is it so quirky and different? Well, he was telling his story in one of his interviews about how he was like 12 or 13 years old. He bought his first CDs, his first records, and he felt cheated because it was basically all the songs sounded the same. All the 10 tracks on the album were exactly the same. And eventually, when Beck started creating music for himself, what he wanted to do was to basically create albums where all of the songs live their own lives. And I think that is the reason why Odelay is such a celebrated album, because it is one of those albums where Beck actually managed to capture that line of thinking, that train of thought, that idea in one of the best possible ways. Mutations is the third official album that Beck released. It was released in 1998. Here, he worked together with Nigel Godrich. For you guys who don't know who this is, he is basically a very famous producer who has worked on most of Radiohead's discography, I believe. Together, they brought out this very serious and somber tone that you'll find both in the lyricism and in the sonic soundscapes on this album. It's a lot calmer and more direct compared to the previous two albums that he released. You get a good example of this if you listen to the second track on the album, which is called Nobody's Fault But My Own. Treated you like a rusty blade, a throwaway from an open grave, cut you loose from a chain gang, and let you go. Around this lyricism, you can hear this swarm of melancholic guitars, violins, there's also even sitars here. It's very soothing, but also very depressive in a way. There are some random weird stuff going on this album as well. If you listen to the random racket at the end of Cancelled Check, that is one example. I guess it's impossible for Beck to escape his quirky, weirded out nature completely. I also want to mention that on Mutations, you find some songs that nod towards the future of Beck, something that he will continue to do in the future, a la songs like the very soft and serene We Live Again, or the very uplifting and gentle sound of Dead Melodies. This is something that you'll hear later on in his discography as well. Now moving on, we have Beck's fourth official full-length album, which is called Midnight Vultures from 1999. Immediately when you put this album on, you hear that it's completely different from his previous albums. It's a complete turn on the dial when it comes to the genre. This time, instead of folk, grunge, alternative rock and hip-hop, he's jumping over to funk rock and R&B. The album is filled with these very energetic experimental hooks all the way through. It's really hard to let go of these. I've had several of these songs on my mind for a very, very long time, almost to the degree that I just irritate people. Everything from the funky, I think we're going crazy, to the humorously and futuristic, we like to ride on executive play, and the all too classical, and a sister, I think her name was Deborah. Ooh, ooh! Although a lot of the album is very intensive and very spot on at times during the first half, during the last half it becomes a bit weaker. It doesn't have that same oomph to it, if you get what I mean. Milk and Honey, Beautiful Way, Pressure Zone, these are some of the tracks that they try to reiterate some of that energy from the first half of the album, but it just doesn't pull through in the same way. About the creative process on this album, Beck said that he was inspired by a palette of many different artists, such as Kraftwerk, David Bowie and Prince and Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, among many others. One of the pillars of this album was also simply American pop culture at that time. So what I think made this album quite successful was the fact that, you know, it was an album that related to the R&B pop culture in America at that time, but at the same time it was just so weird and quirky and filled with the instrumental and sonic imaginations of Beck. Now moving on, we have Sea Change from 2002. This is Beck's fifth official album. Again, we see Beck taking a completely new direction with his music. It is sort of a bit similar to Mutations. As I told you before, he would go on to create more simplified music that is mostly based on acoustic guitars and synths in the future, and this is where it's happening. Beck's vocals are a lot more toned down, they're calmer, and the same with the lyricism as well. It's a lot more direct, it's not that abstract. His scope for genres became a whole lot more narrower. He didn't blend together genres as he did before. He mainly focused on creating something orchestral, acoustic, and serene. And despite of the fact that he focused on something that was a lot more concentrated artistically, narrower in terms of the genres, it's still an album that is filled with a lot of emotions and purity. For example, in some of the songs, you can listen to how the orchestra is kind of sampled, tweaked, and dramatically colliding with the very depressive guitar chords. You also have Beck's eggshell fragile vocals that really play out as a prominent role here. If you don't feel a sense of depression, loneliness, maybe desolation when listening to this, I don't know what will make you feel that way, because this is just, I don't know, it's a great reflection of what Beck was feeling at that time when he created this. The presence of an orchestra, which you'll find on track number 2, Paper Tiger, and track number 4, Lonesome Tears, is a big point in the direction of Serge Gainsbourg. If you want to, you can go and listen to his album, Histoire de Melody Nelson. That is another great album, and it's definitely here that Beck is taking his inspiration from when it came to the blend of acoustic elements, rock music, and an orchestra. A lot of fans have also compared this album to Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks, because both of these albums are all about a personal breakup with a loving relationship. Jesus Christ. Both are very personal albums that reflect on the end of an affair. I also want to mention that this was the point when Beck's fan base started to split up into two groups. You have those people who love Mourning Face, which is a later album that he put out. They love Sea Change, they love Mutations, they love his acoustic, more country-related stuff. While you have this other side of fans that also like his more experimental side, where he blended together genres like hip-hop, rap, experimental rock, and etc. I have to say that I both enjoy his acoustic stuff, but I also see the value in the other stuff, so I don't know, I'm kind of schizophrenic when it comes to his discography, I guess. I don't know. Now, moving on, we have Güero, or Güero, as some people like to pronounce it. And many people see this album as the return to the style that he had back on Odelay. There are some hip-hop tracks here like Que Onda Güero and Hell Yes. You also have some Latin-inspired rhythms on the 4th track, which is called Missing. And then otherwise, in general in the album, you have this manjula of rock music, electronics, hip-hop, and yeah, it's all over the place, really. Good old Beck, I guess. He just wanted to go back to his crazy mental frenzy of creating all kinds of stuff. But I guess that is a good thing, because he wanted to create a world inside every single song, and I can definitely see this on the album. Personally, when I listen to this album, I also have this bad thing of never getting through the entire album. Broken Drum is a song that ruins the whole thing for me, because why put the slowest, lowest energy song after the funkiest ass jazzer Hell Yes? Why would you ever do that, huh? Why is that a good idea, Beck? Guys, you gotta thumb up this video, you gotta watch it like 10 times so that Beck can actually watch this video and answer me, because I want an answer. Why did you have to put that track after Hell Yes? In addition to killing the flow on the album with Broken Drum, all the songs after Broken Drum as well are a bit lackluster in my view. They're not as melodically satisfying, they're not challenging you in a positive way, like the otherworldly Hell Yes sampling or the intense percussion on Black Tambourine. Now, scoping out and looking at the macro level of his discography so far, I can totally see that a lot of his discography is sort of like a pendulum. It goes back and forth. Odelay was a very expressive record, Mutations was kind of an introspective one, and then you have Midnight Vultures, which again was very expressive. Sea Change was introspective, and so on and so forth. In 2006, Beck mentioned in an interview that his next release, The Information, was actually a mix of both of these worlds. This was something that I found to be very interesting. I've never listened to The Information from start to finish before. I've listened to it vaguely here and there, but during the making of this video I actually got to sit down and listen to it, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it. Or, I mean, tracks like Elevator Music, I Think I'm in Love, Cell Phone's Dead, Nausea, these are amazing tracks. I really like those. But then again, you have the same problem with Güero and Midnight Vultures. It becomes a bit lackluster towards the end. I agree with the statement that this album is a crossing between Beck's soft and his more expressive side, but at the same time, the last songs on this album, the second half, contained not as many catchy melodies, not as many surprising moments. In general, it wasn't the same artistic tapestry that Beck usually deliver on an album like this. It's like he almost cared a little bit more about the album artwork.
So people get to make their own CD covers.
Yeah, they banned us because it was an unfair incentive.
Now, moving on, we have the 8th official release by Beck. It's called Modern Guilt. This is by some reviewers considered to be one of Beck's most psychedelic endeavors. The phasing effects, the surging vocals, the very ethereal sound of the synths on... what song was that? Chemtrails. That is a great example of how psychedelic it all is. This is yet another album that I needed to check out more, and I listened to it during the production of this video, and it is a great album, but it's not his best one by far. On this album, Beck got some collaborators as well, for example, Cat Power. He also got some help with the production by Danger Mouse. What you'll hear is very distinct about this album is that it has, a lot of the songs has this very repetitive beat. Beck is also keeping the structures of the different songs in a very linear state, and there's more room to create melodies here, and a lot of the melodies are very outstanding. I definitely feel that all of the songs here create a world of their own that you just want to dream yourself into, sort of. The American Music Magazine, when they reviewed this album, they said something that I felt was very spot on. They said, Beck is somehow more aware while puffing out his waves of broken poetry, as opposed to the casual seed spitting he has been known to turn to. So as you could hear, a lot of the lyricism on this album is a lot more sensible, they're more direct, but they also take on this very melancholic, depressive nature. I mean, just by mentioning the song titles on this album, I get the feeling of something dark and cold. Orphans, Modern Guilt, Youthless, Walls, Replica. I mean, you get the point. It's sort of like being in this black and white movie, and yeah, it's kind of creepy and scary to be there. That is the feeling that I'm getting from this album, from just reading the titles, and of course there's also this psychedelic nature to it all that is kind of... Moving on to the very, very close future, we have 2014's 9th official album by Beck, which is called Mourning Face. If you listen to Sea Change, if you listen to Mutations, this is definitely an album that you should consider to check out because it's very similar to those. Carefully applied acoustic instruments fill the soundscapes with this timeless warmth. It's very hard for me to compare the flow of this album to any other album out there because it's so fine-tuned. It's such an amazing flow from one song to another. Every track ebbs into the next one with very, very little effort. I might be overly poetic, or maybe I'm just visualizing a bit too much here, but listening to this album is like watching the sun go from here to here. It's very peaceful. A lot of people think it's boring, but I think it's peaceful. When it comes to the genre scope, again, it is becoming very narrow. Like 90% of this record is basically folk and orchestral music, and then the rest of that ratio, the 10%, is basically country music and some psychedelicness. Again, just like on Sea Change, I love how Beck is using the orchestra to sort of amplify the soundscapes, making them very lofty and epic. Just listen to the explosive dynamics on the song Waking Light, or the more serene moments that is created by the violin on... I also think Beck's voice is lending itself really beautifully to the soundscapes and the type of music that he is creating on this album. He has this very deep, sometimes raspy voice that is... it just fits very well together with this acoustic music. I don't know, for me, Mourning Face is an amazing album, one of my favorite Beck albums of all time. But then again, I'm a bit schizophrenic, as I like to say, when it comes to his discography. I love his experimental stuff, but I also love his more calm acoustic stuff as well. Again, what I think is amazing about Beck is that no matter what he's doing, no matter if he's creating acoustic music or experimental stuff, he always manages to capture sort of a world within each and every album. Maybe not within each and every song on every album for my part, but at least he's able to provide something that is very unique. And that I think that comes from his very artistic approach to music from a very early age. When he was 12, when he was 13, and he listened to these albums with 10 songs that sounded exactly the same, he always wanted to create something that was different, something that he himself would enjoy. And I don't know, I really respect that statement, that value that he carried with him into music. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this discography, guys. I don't know if it will turn out good or bad when I'm sitting here right now. I hope it is something that you can learn something from, that you found to be at least a little bit entertaining and interesting. Make sure to smash that subscribe button if you like this video, if you want to watch more of these. Also, let me know in the comments below what you would want me to review next, or what type of discography documentary you want me to make, okay? Because I'm always open to listen to you guys, so yeah, let me know. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope to see you later. Stay tuned. Bye.